Thank you all for being here today. Good afternoon. Is it good afternoon yet?
Yeah.
Good afternoon. As many of you know, Connecticut has joined 15 other states in suing the Trump administration and President Trump himself for breaking the law and for violating what I think is shredding the Constitution. I think what we've seen over the last few days have been a torrent of tweets now, is an unprecedented presidential temper tantrum because Congress isn't giving the president what he wants, and he's stomping now all over the Constitution. And the basis of our suit is pretty straightforward. The president has completely violated and invaded the separation of powers. The Constitution is very clear and explicit. Article 1, Section 8, the power of the purse. It is Congress's exclusive authority to raise taxes, raise money for the federal government, and to spend and expend that money. And it's Congress's sole prerogative whether to fund or not to fund a border wall. And the president doesn't like that decision, so he's decided to countermand Congress and in an unprecedented move pervert the National Emergencies Act and declare a national emergency that does not exist. And we know this because we see it with our own eyes, this idea that there are caravans bursting through the southern border, that we have this porous southern border where undocumented immigrants are pouring through is just not true. We know for a fact, based on our own Customs and Border Enforcement statistics, that we have the lowest number of illegal border crossings in 45 years. And we have more Border Patrol agents in this country than we've ever had. And this is an important point, too. The Cato Institute noted that they did an exhaustive study, and they found no evidence since 1975 of any undocumented immigrant who crossed the border illegally who's killed anybody or committed a terrorist attack. And so there's just no national emergency, and you need only to listen to the president himself, who said that he didn't have to do this, that he was doing it because he wanted to do it faster, and then he went off and played golf. The final thing is since Friday, we've heard from a number of the president's advisors, including Stephen Miller, who, I got to tell you, watching Stephen Miller, that guy looks like, you know, he has a sociopathic relationship with fact and the law. But they asked Stephen Miller, can you give us one example like this in our nation's history in which Congress has expressly disallowed the president from taking an action, and then he goes and does it anyway? And have we ever done that? Has the president ever done that in declaring a national emergency? He could not come up with one. And we've confirmed, and the national press has confirmed, that of 59 national emergencies declared in our nation's history, never once has Congress expressly prohibited the spending of money for a particular purpose, and then the president has gone around and did something totally different. I should note, by way of analogy, there have been times where we've seen this movie before where a president has been prohibited by Congress from taking an action or a military action, to put a finer point on it, and then went ahead and did it covertly behind the back of Congress. That was the Iran-Contra scandal. And many people went to jail for that because it was so brazenly illegal and unconstitutional. And now we're seeing it not in a covert action, but out in the open. And so that's why we were compelled, the 16 of us, to file this action. We feel very strongly about our causes of action, and we feel very strongly that we're going to prevail, and we ask the court for an injunction and declaratory judgment stopping this president from blowing past Congress and shredding our Constitution. And with that, I'm happy to take questions. Mark?
I believe all of the attorneys general say they want are Democrats, and you picked a district that has a reputation of stopping them on things.
Yeah.
And also, what I think some people might say you're playing it a little loose with the facts. The Congress hasn't forbidden the spending. They just couldn't come to an agreement on the spending.
Well, let's be clear, he's been asking for this wall that allegedly Mexico was going to pay for since before he was elected president. And then he insisted it was going to happen throughout the 2 years of his presidency. And he had a Republican Congress in both houses that for almost 2 years refused to give him what he wanted. And then in this bill, they expressly said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to give you $1.375 billion to help construct a fence, I think is what the current appropriation says, but it clearly does not say build a concrete and steel border wall of up to $7 billion.
With regard to the appearance of partisanship, because they're almost all Democrat attorneys general, can he say, oh, well, this is just another partisan attack on me?
Sure, he can, and I wish that my Republican colleagues would join us. But I'm not going to make any apology for standing up to the President of the United States when he has blown past Congress and intends to shred the Constitution of the United States. And let me also say, we have a special obligation here in Connecticut. I'm the Attorney General for the Constitution state. And the Constitution is an agreement among the states, with the federal government, with the people of this country. It's a compact between all of us that, as the sovereign state of Connecticut, will give up some power to the federal government, provided they act in accordance with the Constitution. And the federal government can thereby act on our behalf. When the federal government doesn't do that, and the President of the United States breaks that compact, breaches our agreement, violates the Constitution, we have to call them out, because the Constitution state, Connecticut, didn't sign up for that. And so, as this state's Attorney General, that's why I'm stepping forward.
General Tom, isn't there a big difference, though, between a state like California filing this lawsuit and a state like Connecticut filing this lawsuit, considering the impact of the border there and the impact of the border here?
No, I think we have very similar interests, and they're very well aligned. It's no secret, and we're very proud of this fact, that in Connecticut, we have a robust defense contracting industry, and that we rely a great deal on defense-related spending and military construction projects. And so the President has stepped out in this half-baked plan to develop or to declare a national emergency. He said, I'm going to target military construction money, I'm going to target drug interdiction money, I'm going to target drug forfeiture money. Millions of dollars that Connecticut relies on, along with 15 other states, and I would say probably a lot more than the 16 that have already filed suit, rely on that money. And so our interests with California are well aligned with respect to the specific harm that's going to be done to Connecticut. But again, I'll say and reiterate what I mentioned earlier, and that's this concept of federalism and the fact that the states are bound together, 50 of us, by our consent. And we're brought together and bound together by our Constitution. When the President of the United States decides that he's just going to disregard it and stomp all over it, it's up to us to stop him, because that will do great damage to our nation and this state.
Do you plan to use in-house counsel, outside counsel, and why is this a good use of taxpayer dollars and time?
Right now it is, and I expect that this will be the case. It's an entirely Connecticut team. It's the most senior lawyers here in this office, working with senior lawyers across the country in these 15 other states. It's the same way we approached our suit against the EPA. It's the same way that we're approaching the suit against the Trump tax law. And we have, I think, more than 40 multi-states and actions against the Trump administration. I know that's unprecedented, but we are in uncharted waters right now. We have a president that is doing great damage to this country and its public and democratic institutions, and somebody has to do something about it. I've said many times that because Congress in many sectors is broken, and because it is so hard for Congress to get things done, to stand up to this president, that as the president blows past Congress, the states are the firewall. We're the last line of defense.
Are you saying that the seizure of this money could affect the Navy base, right? It's not affecting defense contractors like the sub base, the sub builder, or the helicopter?
It could. It could.
I thought the money that he was taking was specifically for like building
So-
schools on basis,
so-
like at Groton.
So it could include that money, it may include that money, but the president really has stepped out and stated his intentions pretty clearly. But because it's a half-baked proposal, right, it's not altogether clear what the president intends to do other than to prejudice us, okay? And so I think this is a fluid and developing situation. And what's really interesting, if you think about it, is we've made the strategic decision, I've made the strategic decision on behalf of this state to plead our case as it's been filed, right? And we'll see what the president does. You know, if the president goes out and identifies specific projects for the 16 states and decides to try to undermine us, right, by not touching those projects, let me just finish. Yeah, but let me just finish my thought, which is, if he goes out there and tries to identify specific projects and then tries to undermine our case, then he won't have the money for his wall. So what's he going to do? He's going to have to go to other pots of money, okay? And I am quite sure that as he moves to other pots of money, that he will further damage and prejudice Connecticut. I think the president's in a box, okay? And I'm not going to let him get out of it.
Why is this specific lawsuit also?
Did you get it?
No, he said somebody gold.
Why do you think that this case and cases like this are a good use of taxpayer time and money?
Well, I think that this state and the people that live in it feel like we are under tremendous pressure from this president, and that our civil rights are being impacted. Our communities, particularly communities that have large, robust, vibrant immigrant communities, and communities that have relatively fewer immigrants, for example, like Farmington and Simsbury, who were so affected by the potential deportation of the Huangs that happened more than a year and a half ago, I would say. And so this racist and hateful attack on immigrants and immigrant families is doing untold damage to the people of our state and people who are here, quote unquote, legally, like my family, by the way. But people who are here legally are afraid to go to work. They're afraid to go to the hospital. They're afraid to go to the library. They're afraid to go to courthouses to enforce their own rights and civil rights. They're afraid to go to church. We had clergy here a couple weeks ago, and they were saying that average Sunday attendance was down because their immigrant parishioners were afraid to go to church. So this is affecting everybody. It affects our bottom line in our businesses that rely on immigrants to come to work. And so when you have an attack on one group of people, particularly an attack as hateful and racist as this one, it affects everybody and affects our businesses, our schools, our way of life. That's why it's so important that we stand up for the people of this state in moments like this.
Thank you, General.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
General Tom, sorry.
Sure.
Back here, barely listening. Can you just expand a little more on actual impacts we can see related to costs in Connecticut? You said millions. I know Mark had asked you a similar question, but can you expand on what numbers you might be seeing right now?
So it's developing. Obviously, the president just took this action last week, and we're trying to understand where he's going. But we're in close contact with our two United States senators and members of the congressional delegation and the governor's office, and we have our eye on a number of projects that are at risk. But it's hard to know fully yet what the president is doing as we just start this process, and as we dig into it. We expect there may be discovery early on in the case, and we'll understand more what's behind the president's half-baked proposal.
Any particular projects, defense projects, anything like that?
As I said earlier, I've made the strategic decision to plead our case as filed, because I don't want to give the President of the United States a roadmap to undermine our case.
Thank you.
Thank you.